Hey, Husker fans, happy June. This is the Pick Six podcast. We have a skeleton crew today. It's the Tom Shatel and myself, Evan Bland. Sam McEwen is heading toward Colorado for a few days. Take some well-deserved R&R, as you said, Tom. We're hoping. Here's hoping on the Pick Six that he's driving the speed limit and relaxing. He has nowhere to be, unlike when we went out there to Colorado last fall. So we're hoping that Sam has a great few days. How are you doing?
Good. Just anxious to hear about your trip to Eskimo Joe's.
We can talk about that. Yeah, Big 12 country down there in Stillwater. And I think this will be a little bit of a shorter podcast today. We have a few things we want to hit on. We're going to talk about some kickoff times for the football season that have been released. I think there's some things that we can read into with that. Talk a little bit of big picture things, where the NCAA is at with revenue sharing and some other things as to how they might affect Nebraska. But as you said, Tom, I think maybe the place to start would be sort of the post-mortem on Nebraska baseball. And they finish out the weekend in Stillwater. They don't quite go the distance, but they play into Sunday. They play Florida twice. They finish at 40-22. And yeah, I guess I can tell you a little bit about the experience. First of all, I hadn't been to Stillwater, I think, since 2007. When I was in college, went and saw football play down there when Boone Pickens Stadium was still being built. But hit Eskimo Joe's, hit Hideaway Pizza, hit Bad Smoking Joe's, one of the barbecue spots there in the edge of town. So I don't know, Tom, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but it made me miss Big 12 country.
Oh, definitely. And and also Big A country before that.
Yeah.
I think I probably hadn't been there since 2010. Last year in the Big 12, when Nebraska lost a big one to the Longhorns at home, and it was a crusher. And the next game was at Stillwater, and they went down there and beat the heck out of the Pokes. I think I remember Tanner Martinez had a really big game that day. But it's been a while. I'd never covered a baseball game. I'd never actually been to their old stadium there, but the new one looked pretty good.
It did. And I thought that was a reminder. It kind of reminded me, Tom, of when they went to Arkansas in 21 for the regional, and they came back, and like the administrators and the coaching staff was kind of inspired by what they saw with the stadium and the player development stuff around the stadium, how they set things up for fans. And they didn't ever really, nothing really much ever came of it for a number of reasons. But I kind of got that vibe this week too, down in it's O'Brate Stadium. It's been there for like 3 years, and it's immaculate. I mean, it's gorgeous. It was made to host a regional. I was kind of joking with someone down there that like it kind of like all the talk this year about Nebraska hosting a regional, it kind of reminded me of like if you had your friend over to spend the night, and then you go over to his house the next week and you're like, oh, your house is nicer than my house. That
Yeah.
kind of a vibe. That was what Oklahoma State had. I mean, they had a practice field right next to the stadium. They had weights and batting cages. They had these corrals, they called them, in the outfield, where you as fans or organizations could buy a little stall, and you have a grill, and you bring your own food, and you just hang out under a tarp and you watch the game from the outfield. Like, just really cool stuff. I know that Nebraska administrators kind of went around with their cell phone videos going to take some ideas for what they maybe want to do with Haymarket remodels. But like, I thought it was kind of an embodiment of this idea that like Nebraska baseball does a lot with what it has, but when you go south to some of these places, it's a reminder about how much further they could still go, and how much more you can invest, and how much other schools are investing in the sport when they're trying to get to where Nebraska's trying to get to.
Well, facilities in all sports always evolve, and what you had before that was so cool isn't as cool when you see other stuff over the years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Does uh, uh, the city of Lincoln owns Haymarket Park, correct?
Technically, yes,
Yeah.
operated by the Salt Dogs in
I
Nebraska.
mean, I mean, you think at some point Nebraska's making all this money now. Maybe, maybe they should buy Haymarket Park and 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 like I'm not trying to throw the Salt Dogs out, but I get the feeling that there's a lot of things that they want to do that they can't do, and really I turn that into their facility and I do some of the things that you're mentioning. But for instance, they can't decorate the stadium in as like a Husker stadium. It has to be kind of generic. They can't put College World Series banners on the walls or any of that stuff.
Mhm.
It has to be it's the Salt Dogs home too. Well, I think it'd be better served if and I'm not saying they're going to build another ballpark one day, but you know I think that the city ought to let Nebraska really uh, take control of the park and let them do what they want, let them expand the way they need to do it, and I'm sure that there's some more fan stuff that they could do that the things they have now were great in 2002 and they still work. But you're right. Maybe there's some things you can do in the outfield on the berm or for fans or who knows. But right now, the roster needs a little bit more improvement. It was a good year. Anybody that says otherwise is wrong. Uh, 40 wins is always good. Going to regional is always good. You want 40 wins to have a regional with it. But when you do those two things, it's a good year. I don't care where you are. You don't win the regional, but there's a lot of teams that hosted that didn't win that got upset, and um, it was a crazy weekend. It was topsy turvy, and what it told me was you got Evansville, West Virginia, Kansas State. Um, I don't know who else fits in that bill, but there was some UConn. Um,
Yeah.
there's no question Nebraska can go to a super regional. I mean, right now, their team was as good as other teams. Um, I don't know about West Virginia, but they're certainly as good as UConn, and they're as good as K State,
Mhm.
and probably Evansville as well. I don't know, but I'm just saying they get to a point where they can get to a super regional. But you got to get the right regional. You got to get the right matchup, and then you got to go deliver. You got to go play well. So the program isn't that far away.
Yeah, you mentioned the matchup piece. It kind of reminds me of the conversation that we had with men's basketball, where you kind of wonder what a different sort of matchup would have looked like. Where Nebraska's playing a 3 seed in Florida that was in the College World Series final a year ago. They have a top five probably draft pick in Jack Caglianone, and you could just tell like as the weekend played out, Nebraska played 2 games against Florida. Like this wasn't a great Florida team by its own standards. But I mean, it was full of guys that can hit. It was full of really interesting arms, guys who were high-end recruits who were stepping up in key moments. And they found a way, man. Like I thought that was a very flawed Florida team in a lot of ways. And they barely make the tournament because they barely finished above 500 with a really tough schedule. But they turn it on in this time of year. Like this is when that depth really shows up
Yeah,
is in the regional format. So that to me
yeah,
was maybe the area that Nebraska lacked a little bit in. It kind of was a little bit of a microcosm of the season where it felt very rarely were they able to put all of it together for an extended stretch. Like the first game, the pitching was sound and they couldn't really hit. In the last game, they could slug, but they couldn't play defense or get outs consistently. So they're working on it. And you're right, Tom. Like if they had been, I had said a week ago, if they were in Arkansas this year, this would not have been like 21. Like that was an
Yeah.
Arkansas team that couldn't hit, that had a different sort of vibe. And so I think that it does. Sometimes it just depends on where you're grouped with and what kind of run you can make. And um, I don't know. So like, what are you going to remember about this team, Tom? Obviously, I was very close with it, but as someone who was following it a little bit, maybe more casually, what are you going to remember about what the team did this year?
Well, just sort of the maddening aspect of the midweek and the weekend. The Jekyll and Hyde. I had this conversation with Will Bolt toward the end of the year, and he I mentioned that you know the phrase Jekyll and Hyde, and he disagreed. He thought that it was just a case of um, he said the midweek games. He said that a lot of the teams get up for them and play play their best. But he said it's also the midweek games are also slugfests, and that they just weren't as good at that aspect of it. And well, they need to get better at that because I think the midweek, losing some of those midweek games, you're not going to win them all. It's baseball. You're just, you're going to have those nights. But a couple of times, giving up 8 runs in the last 2 innings. I mean, you get, on good teams, you got to find a way to shut that down. And because they scored enough runs to win a couple of those games. But they got to find a way to get those games won because that's the difference between going to this regional and going to that regional, or having this seed or that seed. I mean, it's and every little bit helps. College baseball is a lot tighter than it used to be. There's a lot of a lot of 3 seeds are pretty damn good, and so every little bit helps. Like I said, you're not going to win them all. Um, Creighton's going to come after you, but you can't get swept on it. And that was another game at home, the Creighton game in Haymarket, where they had the game in the ninth and they didn't finish. Well, that wasn't necessarily about not enough runs. I guess it was about not enough runs is that they couldn't hold the lead, but maybe you just need to get a bigger lead. But they did tighten up that pen a little bit, and I like the style of you don't rely on the big home run. You go manufacture runs and you hustle and you kind of drive people crazy, and it's a lot of teamwork involved. But it wouldn't be bad to have a Max Anderson or somebody hanging out. And at the end of the year, they did. Swenson stepped up and really did that thing. So um, it's I love what they said after the game. Um, Good year, we're in a good place, but there's work to be done.
I mean, I agree with all that. I thought the last 2 weeks of the year really captured a lot of it. The high of winning the Big Ten tournament in Omaha and sort of the love fest that allowed fans and the team to have with each other. And then the regional, in a lot of ways, like we said, was just kind of a reminder of that there's still work to do, that it's all about talent, that there's room for the program to invest in itself with facilities and things like that. So, it's been on a 3-year upward trajectory now. So ever
Yeah.
since they beat Arkansas, there was the 22 season when they didn't make the Big Ten tournament. Then last year they made the Big Ten semis and had a better season. And now this year they were back in regionals. So it feels like when you look at what this team will have next year, there's going to be more of a core group of returners than there have been in the past. And obviously you have portal season and everything else that could change that. But they lose Brett Sears, the Big Ten pitcher of the year. You're going to lose Josh Caron to the Major League Draft. a couple other steady pieces like Ben Columbus or Cole Evans, maybe Gabe Swanson. That's kind of the interesting one to me, Tom, is like
Yeah.
what's the value of a guy who didn't perform well enough to really start all season, but then had an epic 2 week heater when scouts and TV cameras were all on. Like how do you evaluate that guy? I think that'll be really fascinating to see how that goes.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do agree with you on the tournament. That'll be something we'll all remember, and it was a very cool thing. And Sunday we'll always remember that. And it was kind of a reminder of why we love Nebraska baseball and why people wanted Bolt to be the coach and Childress coming back. He made a big difference. It was kind of what everybody needed at the time, because it had been a little bit of an up and down year, uh, you know. Um, so yeah, everybody will have that memory, and I think when they come back to the Big Ten tournament now, they'll be able to kind of draw on that a little bit. So anyway,
yeah, agreed. Well, let's talk a little football here in June. We're creeping ever closer to a season. But we got kickoff times last week. There were some times announced. I'm going to read them off, Tom, and I want you to tell me which of these games that we now have kickoff times for is the most important to you. And maybe you already know. So we got August 31st, UTEP's 2:30 on Fox in
yeah.
Lincoln. We already knew Colorado, September 7th, 6:30 on NBC. Northern Iowa, 6:30 on BTN. Illinois, that's the Friday home game, 7 o'clock on Fox. At Purdue, September 28th, 11 a.m. We don't know the network. And October 5th, Rutgers at home, time and network still kind of to be determined. It'll be a morning game. Which of those games to you, Tom, if you have to win one, which one is it?
Well, it's Colorado, and the game time is the best possible time for Nebraska and their fans. Now they certainly have to go win the game, maybe, but it playing at night is a different deal. Um, Michigan and Ohio State have won in Lincoln at night, um, but those were the Ohio State, that was a mismatch at the time, and Michigan, it came down to a play at the end, and that was a really good Michigan team too. But this is a Colorado game that early on could change the season. Um, and it could really jumpstart things. A lot of people are very hungry for something big. We just talked about winning the Big Ten baseball tournament. That was something big. Well, they need something like that in Nebraska football, and having that as the second game with more home games coming up behind it. Could really jumpstart things and send the team on their way. Conversely, if you lose it, it's a big downer. You got to recuperate, but that game time is probably the optimum for giving Nebraska a chance in that game. So um, otherwise, yeah, Rutgers, Illinois, yeah, it's all fine. To me, the Friday night game is. I'm not saying it's much ado about nothing. It does suck for the high school people, but like I've said, they they survived last year's Friday night game, and the people that go to high school games are going to go to the games. They've got a, a, a player they know, or their kids on the team are in the band, or they know somebody on the team or in the band, and they're going to go to the game no matter what. So I'm not worried about that. Um, so yeah, what else after that?
Well, those are the times that we know. The other
Okay,
ones are
well, we
sort of
know
to be
Iowa
determined.
too.
We know Iowa at the end of the year. Yeah, that's
That's
right.
an interesting one. I think that's like kind of like the Colorado game. I wouldn't want to have to win at Iowa at night. That's a, I wouldn't want to have to go anywhere in a big game and win on the road at night. I think Nebraska probably ought to have if they're going to a bowl, and when we think they're going to be, you want to have that wrapped up before you go to the Hawkeye, the Kinnick, you know,
Icebox.
at night. Yeah, it can be really cold. Sure could. But I just think at night it's a different deal. So, um, but yeah, interesting. Nebraska's a nighttime favorite. Everybody wants to see him. So, um, and so we'll go do our thing, and we'll ride fast.
Yeah, well, there's going to be a lot of that this year. I'm gonna focus on that Illinois game a little bit, Tom. And I know a lot of it's going to get caught up in the whole Friday night aspect, and there are definite downsides to that, especially with high schools, and because this is the first time Nebraska's played at home on one of these Friday night games. I think that's a
Right.
different dynamic than when they're on the road and people might have just watched on TV anyway. But I think the game itself is right up there. It probably doesn't have the cachet. I would agree with you. It doesn't have the cachet of Colorado and beating Dion and what that would be. But the fact is that Nebraska hasn't won its Big Ten opener since 2019. And you think about all of those games that they've had since then, and they've kind of deflated the season. I mean, you had Ohio State was the COVID 2020 year. You had the game at Illinois in August when it felt like the season was over already. Obviously, you had the Ireland game with the onside kick against Northwestern, then Minnesota last year where they lose an emotional game, and it just you're playing uphill the rest of the way, it feels like from there. So like
Yeah.
I think there's extra importance to getting off to a strong start. It could be it'll probably be the 400th sellout at Memorial Stadium. And then I think the other thing too you look at, Tom, is like we finally get some networks uh, that are put out there, and you've got UTEP on Fox, you've got Illinois on Fox, you've got Colorado on NBC. At some point, there's going to be CBS late in the year, like and Sam's written about this. I enjoyed his recent breakdown about how just abhorrent Nebraska's been on national networks in the last like 5 or 6 years. They've won almost none of their games in these situations. And so what a stage for a new coaching staff to showcase what they have, to have a chance for a big win. I mean, how many times in college football in the last few years are you watching other games and you're seeing fans celebrate a big win and you're just like, God darn, how long has it been since Nebraska fans could just cut loose and enjoy a moment that wasn't expected and have people, watching them enjoy that moment? Like it's been a long time. I feel like we say it every year, but here it is again on an even bigger stage. Like this is a chance for Nebraska to show how good things can be when they win. And it's been a long time, right?
Yeah, it's been all those games you mentioned that they lost had one thing in common. They were all on the road.
Yeah.
In fact, Nebraska was on the road in 2019 at Illinois when they opened.
Hmm.
And 18, they were at Michigan on the road when they opened. The last home opener, league opener, was 17, and it was Rutgers.
Right.
And I got my handy media guide out here, and I can tell you that Nebraska was 2-2 at that point. They'd lost at Oregon. They beat Mike Riley's last team, won, and the the great coordinator Bob Diaco. They beat Arkansas State to open the year by 7, and then they lost at Oregon, and they lost in Northern Illinois at home. So Rutgers, they come home and they get stayed by winning the Rutgers. So, or beating Rutgers at home. So I like the fact and I think the 400th sellout thing is going to give that night. This is a very good point you make. The 400 sellout is going to make it a little bit different atmosphere. It's going to give it a bigger game feel. Maybe not Colorado big, but bigger game feel, and that's gonna. And I think that's going to help that. And I agree. I think there's something about winning that first conference game but also being on the road all the time. So um, stage is set. They're going to have a lot of home games early, and two of those are big. You know, so if you come out of those well, if you can win those two home games that are big, I mean, it could be a lot of momentum and a lot of good vibes early. So we'll see a lot of they'll have a new quarterback. It won't be perfect, um, but having the game at night at Memorial Stadium is like a extra. Not like the 12th man. That's Texas A&M, but that's sort of like an extra weapon to have. So, yeah, a very good point on that game.
Yeah. And like you said, a lot of night games too. I mean, Nebraska over the last handful of years hasn't really been good enough to warrant a lot of night games. And here
Yeah,
they are with some opportunities early in the year at home to do that. I mean, what? No 11 a.m.s until late September. That's got to
yeah.
be a record for this program in recent years. So some major opportunities. So I guess last thing on this today, Tom, we're in sort of that weird month where most college athletics are done competing. You still got the College World Series, of course, coming up, but for the most part, it's wrapped up. And this is the time of year when people go on on vacation and major news is dropped, major bombs come down. And we've had it with realignment in recent years, and this is about the time when NIL came into being a few years ago. So summer always has this way of having these sneaky major moments that happen. What are you kind of keeping your eye on this summer as you do go on vacation and we get ready for the next season? Like, is it revenue sharing? Is it roster size? Is it unlimited number of coaches? Like, what's the thing? Is it alignment? What's the thing that you're going to be following that could potentially change things here in the next month or two?
Yeah, I don't think it's revenue sharing. I think that's going to happen. I don't think anything's going to happen this summer. I think we'll speculate a lot on that. Um, and what athletes, Howard Schools, first of all, um, going to get $20 million. It's probably going to be a $20 million annual buy-in where you want to revenue share. That's your limit. You can go up to that limit, but Howard School's going to find a way to get that money. For the Big Ten and SEC, the answer is easy. They got it. They get it every year. For the other schools, other conferences, it'll be a tougher deal. And then it's all about priorities. What athletes get the money, and what sports are you going to cut? If you have to sacrifice, if you have to come up with money to pay athletes, and you got to cut a sport, who's on the block? And boy, I'm thinking about the sport of college baseball there, up and down the line. So for some of these conferences that don't have that money, but um, this summer, I think the ACC is in the spotlight. I think a lot of these, the Florida State is on. They're on right now, and they're determined to leave, and I think that might happen this summer. And there's a lot of speculation about them coming to a conference near us, Big Ten. Carolina's making a lot of noise,
Yeah.
and they're going to have a fight because there's a lot of people in the state of Carolina that the roots of the ACC go back, and then they go deep, and a lot of people will figure out if Carolina tries to go and get the big money with the SEC or Big Ten, that they break up the uh, Tobacco Road and all those rivalries, and that would be bad. So there's going to be a big fight on their hands there. But Carolina doesn't want to be they don't want to be left behind. Um, and you've got Clemson. So the ACC, the Florida State Clemson divorces are going to happen. It's a question of how much do they pay to get out and when do they get out, and that might happen this July kind of thing, July, August. Wouldn't it be typical if it happened right before Big Ten Media Days? And the
Mhm.
topic at Big Ten Media Days is not Lincoln Riley, it's Florida State. So I've got, at least Nebraska has an athletic director. We're not going to do that this summer. Um, everything's in place. So, um, it's, should be pretty quiet, but I think I just jinxed it.
Oh boy, you said it. Yeah, from a national perspective, I would agree with that. I think locally, what I'll be curious about is if there's any resolution on mandated roster limits and what that could look like. Because Nebraska's it's had and it has more players than most, and everyone knows about the walk-on program and kind of the benefits that Nebraska enjoys with bigger rosters. But like, what would that look like if the NCAA said, "Hey, we're going
Yeah.
to cap it at 110 or 85?" What would that look like? I know Matt Rule's been staunchly against that. Most power coaches have come out against that idea, so it doesn't really feel like it's going to be that low. But I think anything that forces Nebraska to trim it down would be a challenge for that team. And because you look at some of the other issues, revenue sharing, nobody, no program wants to do it, but I think Nebraska is in as good a shape as anybody. Alignment isn't really affecting Nebraska right now. NIL is kind of what it is. The coaching, uh, eliminating coaching limits on who can coach on field would be interesting, but I don't know that Nebraska is all that different from what a lot of programs would do. So to me, it's what does the roster size look like, and how can Nebraska, how would they have to adjust if that were to come to pass? I don't think that would benefit them as much. So we'll see. Like you said, Tom, these things have a way of dropping conveniently before media days. They have a way of dropping sometimes on quiet early July Friday afternoons, on holiday weekends. You just never know. But like this is it feels like it's when administrators and decision makers finally have a little bit of time and they're like, all right, what are we gonna do now?
Yeah.
Uh, that maybe they wouldn't be so bold to do during a season.
Yeah, I can guarantee you if there's realignment news, it'll be in July. So right before SEC and everybody else. So, but um, yeah, I'm going to write about the not roster size, but staff size
Mm.
for Sunday. I think we had a good talk with um, Sean Patton a while ago that I never got to write about, and just the idea that the approach with Nebraska football is to retain players, and the size of their staff is intended to take care of all these players and give them everything they need, so they stay. And I think that going forward, that's going to be a, a really intriguing approach. Um, but yeah, I never really got into the roster sizes yet. I think there's going to be a compromise there at some point. Maybe I think a lot of not everybody does it the way Nebraska does it, but I would think that a lot of schools would want to be able to not have a cap that's too tight on the roster. But um, that said, a lot of schools are just going into the portal, so they're not worried about the roster size. They're worried about the who can they get out of the portal. So it's just and we're probably I think we're inching closer to maybe like a June signing date at some point, aren't we?
Yeah,
Um,
there's some momentum for that.
so this might be the last free summer.
Well,
It might be a there might be a high school signing day next June. Um, I just wish the high school kids would would get first dibs. The transfer portal would happen after the signing date because I feel like a lot of spots are taken up by the portal for these high school kids. So, um, but man, June's pretty early, so I feel like if you sign in June, which I'm in favor of. I've had high school kids. I still have a high school kid, and if they want to do it early and get it out of the way, let them. But yeah, I think that's a possibility that we'll have that next June.
Yeah. Well, a lot of questions come with that too. I mean, if you sign in June, how many players are going to opt out of their senior years to stay healthy and keep their spot? Or how many, or I guess, what's the ability of a player who signs in June to change their mind and transfer before they end up at their current school? Like, what's the
Yeah,
value of signing? So a lot of questions, and you can see a scenario then when you would maybe have portal time would be then in December, and then you could maybe go back to your traditional February signing period for kind of the late signees or people who hadn't made their decisions yet. So lots to come. I know Nebraska, this is going to be a busy month for Nebraska. They're in the middle of camp season right now. You're gonna have Friday
well,
Night Lights. You're gonna
I
have official visits.
don't know if you
They're
saw you. Yeah, I also you saw yesterday the state of Florida is going to allow high school kids to have NIL. So,
right.
uh, yeah, you can. If you opt out of the season, you can't have your NIL money.
Well, and the
That's where we're
question
going,
comes,
man.
where does that even come from? High school NIL. Like it seems like that should be more as it was intended, uh, endorsing products and putting your name out there. But
Yeah,
who
but
knows?
there's some sugar daddies that'll come up with 100,000 for somebody.
I don't know if you ever watched Friday Night Lights, the show, but Buddy Garrity would have had a field day with NIL back in the day. The old Texas fictional Texas booster. That would have been a
Finally,
whole
life
different
is catching
show.
up with art. Finally, uh,
Whole different show. All right. Well, that'll be it for today. For Tom, I'm Evan. We'll have Sam back next week. There's going to be a lot of commits this month for Nebraska. They have a lot set up, and we're inching ever closer to football. And we'll have some College World Series coming up here next in a week or so as well. So busy
mhm.
time in Omaha. Exciting time for Nebraska. For Tom, I'm Evan. Thanks for listening to the Pick Six podcast through the Omaha World Herald. Thanks, guys.